We've got some breaking political news tonight. You have not heard this anywhere else. This is exclusive to us, but we have just got our hands on some brand new national polling from Public Policy Polling, the group everybody just calls PPP. This is just being released for the first time right this second. And I have to assure you, not only is this national polling new, I have to also assure you, and you'll understand why in just a second, but I have to also assure you that it's real. This is not an elaborate joke, like a big misdirection story I'm telling at the top of the A block, and it turns out to be an April Fool or whatever. This is real. I am not making this up to entertain you, even though I am sometimes tempted to do things like that. This is real. Okay, new national polling from PPP finds that by a considerable margin, the Republican Party's presumptive nominee for president, Donald Trump, is less popular than Lice. Question 23 from the poll, and I quote, "What do you have a higher opinion of, Donald Trump or Lice?" The proportion of Americans who say they have a higher opinion of Donald Trump is 28%. The proportion of Americans who say they have a higher opinion of Lice when compared to Donald Trump, 54%. So Donald Trump is losing to Lice by 26 points. And turns out it's not just Lice giving Donald Trump a run for his money. Not to nitpick, but this new national polling also finds that Mr. Trump is viewed less favorably than not just Lice, but also traffic jams, used car salesmen, hipsters, the DMV, jury duty, the band Nickelback, and also root canals. Now, to be fair, Mr. Trump he only loses by single digits to some of these. I mean, he's running pretty close to Nickelback and used car salesmen and hipsters. But overall, I mean, this is a list of things you obviously do not really want to be losing to. Now, that said, there is also a little sunshine for Mr. Trump in this new national poll, which we've exclusively got tonight. And the good news for him is that he does beat both cockroaches and hemorrhoids. It's narrow, but a win is a win. Donald Trump is held in higher esteem than hemorrhoids by a margin of 6 points, and he's held in higher esteem than cockroaches by a margin of 4 points. That's the good news. Now, there is bad news about this good news, which is that if you just ask women voters, turns out his win over both cockroaches and hemorrhoids, the wins go away. Women voters nationwide actually prefer both cockroaches and hemorrhoids to Donald Trump. It's weird. It turns out there's a real gender split on those particular issues. Now, there are limits as to how far this kind of information gets you in an election year. I mean, bottom line, hemorrhoids are not going to be on the ballot in November. So we don't have to do complex gender-specific turnout modeling to figure out how this particular gender gap is going to play, to figure out if we are going to get hemorrhoids elected president in the fall. But, sorry. But this new national polling, I'm sorry, I'm 8. I've always wanted to be more than 8 years old. I stopped developing at that age. But this new national polling does come from a stark and interesting and sort of unexpected place in the broader race for president. And that is that all of the 3 remaining candidates for president, all of them, Trump, Clinton, even Sanders, all 3 of them are now viewed unfavorably by the American electorate. They're all now underwater. Bernie Sanders is 3 points underwater in terms of people viewing him more unfavorably than they do favorably. He's 3 points under. Hillary Clinton is 19 points under. But Donald Trump is 27 points underwater. And none of that is good news for any of those 3 candidates. But for Donald Trump, it is so phenomenally, so historically bad that literally big legitimate national polling organizations are polling him now against Lice, and he's losing by a lot. It also means, incidentally, as you might expect, that both Sanders and Clinton in this new national polling, they both beat Donald Trump in a hypothetical general election matchup. They both beat him head-to-head. They both beat him, even if you include a couple of minor party candidates, Jill Stein and Gary Johnson, who are not appealing to anybody in large numbers at this point, but they do both chip away a little bit at either Democrat's prospective ability to beat Donald Trump in November. Still, though, with or without the minor candidates included, Democrats, both of them, still beat Donald Trump in November. Here's what's really, really interesting about this, though. And actually, this is why I fought to get exclusive access to this poll tonight before anybody else had it, because I wanted to break this news. I think this is interesting, I think it's important, and I think it turns the prevailing spin in the Beltway around 180 degrees in the other direction. The prevailing narrative right now, the thing everybody's talking about in the Beltway in terms of American politics, right, is Republican chaos. Republicans at wit's end about what to do with this nominee they have somehow gotten themselves. You know, Donald Trump rending the very fabric of the Republican Party. That's the narrative. That's what we've all been hearing. That's what we've all been hearing since Donald Trump took over the Republican primary process, right? All of the anecdotal reporting that we've been getting, that is, you know, the story of almost every famous Republican who's a big enough deal to get some reporter to write down what he or she says. That's the narrative. But look at the numbers. Look at the actual data and tell me how that narrative stands up to this data. Just let me give you this one piece of this new polling. Ask Democratic voters nationwide, would you be comfortable with Bernie Sanders as the Democratic nominee for president or not? The proportion of Democrats who say they would not be comfortable with Bernie Sanders as their party's nominee, 30%. Ask the same question, again, asking Democrats, ask the same question about Clinton. The percentage of Democrats who would not be comfortable with Hillary Clinton as their party's nominee, that's slightly lower. It's 21%. So that itself is kind of interesting, right? Democrats are slightly more comfortable with the idea of Hillary Clinton being their nominee than Bernie Sanders being their nominee. But there still is this interesting little chunk of the Democratic electorate that would not be comfortable with even Clinton being nominated, 21%. That's the Democratic Party. Now, here's my point. Let's look at the other party. Let's look at the chaotic, torn apart, rending their garments, party collapsing Republicans. Let's look at them. Think. Turns out it's exactly the same number. And this is not bad news for Hillary Clinton. This does not mean that Democrats are freaking out about Hillary Clinton as their potential nominee. Democrats like the idea of her as their nominee more than they like the idea of Bernie Sanders as their nominee. The news here is that Republicans are not freaking out about Donald Trump as their nominee. Only 21% of Republicans say that they would not be comfortable with Donald Trump as the nominee. Republican voters are not uncomfortable with him. I mean, the Republican elite may be freaking out, but Republican voters are fine with him. I mean, in general, the country may like him less than they like root canals, but when you ask Republican voters, they don't care. Republican voters are getting in line. They are unconflicted about him, even though people generally like him less than lice, literally. I mean, when you look at the preferences and the stated intentions of Republican voters, it's almost like you're looking at numbers for another Mitt Romney or some other totally typical Republican nominee. There's this narrative that something totally new is going on with Donald Trump. The party is in a position it's never been in with regard to its nominee, and you could, right? That's the whole narrative. But the data makes him look like just a normal Republican candidate. I mean, ask people who voted for Mitt Romney in the last presidential election who they're going to vote for this year. If you voted for Mitt Romney last time around, you say you're going to vote for Trump this year by a margin of 84-6. It's almost exactly the same as the numbers for Obama voters in 2012. Obama voters from 2012 say they'll vote for Hillary Clinton by basically exactly the same rate as Romney voters will vote for Trump. The whole political narrative is all about Republican angst and Republicans stressing out, not knowing what to do about this totally different kind of nominee. But that narrative is not matched by Republican voters because Republican voters are all aboard with Trump. We just did the numbers for Obama voters versus Romney voters there. Just look at Republican voters versus Democratic voters. Ask Republican voters, they're going to vote for Trump, 82-8. It's basically the same margin by which Democrats say they'd be happy to vote for Clinton. I mean, Donald Trump may be a different kind of cat when it comes to politicians, but Republican voters have decided they really do not care about that. They're cat people, no matter who the cat is. And this means that no matter how much news is supposedly being made about this division in the party, right, in the Beltway press, it's all anybody can talk about, Republican voters are not listening to that. They're not listening to the few supposed Republican Party leaders who say they're against Trump.
We are flirting with nominating a non-serious, unstable, substance-free candidate. We cannot send this narcissist, we cannot nominate this egomaniac. Nominating Donald Trump is a certain way for us to ruin our opportunity to make America great again.
As a Republican, I'm telling you, Donald Trump does not represent Republican ideals to me. He's our Mussolini.
Whatever you want to say and have said about me over the years in terms of things that have come out of my mouth, they're a fraction. I never said that I could shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue and I wouldn't lose a voter. I never called Mexicans rapists and murderers. I never said ban all Muslims from the United States.
Donald has a lot of talents. He does. He's been a very successful businessman. He has lots of talents. He has absolutely no ability in this area. He has no experience in it. He has no ability in it. And it doesn't make him a bad guy. I think he's generally a good person. But you know what? He had no business being president of the United States. And if I thought he did, I wouldn't be running. I'd be helping him.
Donald Trump, the candidate, is a sower of division. Donald Trump is the modern-day incarnation of the Know-Nothing movement. My fellow Republicans, beware of false prophets. My fellow Republicans, do not take that poison. I will not go quiet when this cancer on conservatism threatens to metastasize into a movement of mean-spirited politics that will send the Republican Party to the same place it sent the Whig Party in 1854, the graveyard.
You know, all of those people that we just showed, all those people, including the Utah congressman who said Trump is Mussolini, and Rick Perry and Bobby Jindal and Chris Christie, they've all now endorsed Donald Trump. So think about what that does for Republican voters, right? I mean, say you're like a Rick Perry Republican or a Chris Christie Republican, and you're not sure exactly how you should feel about Donald Trump. You keep hearing this Beltway press narrative that there's all this division in the Republican Party. Well, then, whose lead do you follow? Do you believe the old Chris Christie who was saying Donald Trump was like a 13-year-old and manifestly unfit for the job? Do you believe Rick Perry when he was saying Donald Trump's a cancer on conservatism and must be stopped at any cost? Do you believe them then? Or do you believe them now when they've each now made very clear that they'd love to be Donald Trump's vice president and they're endorsing him now? They'd love to do everything possible to get him elected. Who do you follow? And the Trump campaign announced today that Chris Christie will be leading the transition efforts for President-elect Trump if he wins the November election. And that's a little awkward because of things that Chris Christie has said about Donald Trump in the past. It's also a little awkward in the short term because just a few days ago, the Trump campaign announced that the young man who is married to Mr. Trump's daughter, Ivanka, would actually be leading the presidential transition. So it's awkward to have these two announcements just a few days apart. Is it Chris Christie or is it Jared, Mr. Trump's son-in-law? Well, if it's going to be both of them, that's particularly awkward because that young man's dad, Jared's dad, was sent to federal prison for tax evasion. The federal prosecutor who prosecuted him and sent him to prison was Chris Christie. Awkward staff meetings. But I guess we let bygones be bygones, right? I mean, got to put all that stuff aside. It's all one big happy Trump family now. If you're looking for any more evidence of the happy Trump family in the Republican Party now, consider a very politically connected, very rich Ricketts family, which is probably the single largest source of funds for the anti-Trump advertising campaigns that ran in several states during the primaries. The Ricketts family has TD Ameritrade. The Ricketts family has the Chicago Cubs. The Ricketts family also has the governorship of the state of Nebraska. And even though the Ricketts family did spend millions of dollars on TV ads attacking Donald Trump, Nebraska Governor Pete Ricketts on Friday just introduced Donald Trump at a campaign event in Omaha ahead of tomorrow's Nebraska Republican primary. So, you know what? Narrative be darned. For Republican voters, the Trump issues appeared to be settled. For Republican so-called leaders, even those who were most enthusiastically and loquaciously, vituperatively opposed to Donald Trump. I'm looking at you, Rick Perry. They're all now over that, and they're all looking for Trump administration jobs. People who spent millions of dollars against Trump are now saying they'll spend millions of dollars for Trump. I mean, when Rick Perry told a CNN reporter that he was endorsing Donald Trump a few days ago, he went out of his way to mention in that conversation that if Mr. Trump needed a running mate, quote, I wouldn't say no. Which makes Rick Perry technically the crown prince of the Whig Party. Now, there were some exciting signs that Republican House Speaker Paul Ryan might actually lead some kind of resistance to Mr. Trump becoming the uncontested head of the Republican Party. There was some signs that maybe there might be an effort there. There might be some actual split there. When Paul Ryan declined to offer his endorsement to Mr. Trump late last week, that led to threats this weekend from Mr. Trump that he would have Paul Ryan removed as chairman of the Republican convention this summer. And so it finally started to feel like there might actually be a fight within the Republican Party. This fight we've been hearing so much about within the Republican Party that we see no evidence of, maybe it's finally coming to pass. It's on, right? It's on. He says, I'm not going to support him. And then there's the threat to remove him. It's on. It's a fight. It was on. It was a fight. It's off already. Paul Ryan telling the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel late this afternoon when he was asked about that threat, quote, he's the nominee. I'll do whatever he wants. Actually, I should be clear. Before he says he's the nominee, I'll do whatever he wants, Paul Ryan also says explicitly, again, for emphasis, I'll do whatever. So he says, I'll do whatever twice. I think, do we have the sound of it?
If he asked you to step down as chair of the convention, would you?
I'll do whatever. He's the nominee. I'll do whatever he wants.
I'll do whatever. He's the nominee. I'll do whatever he wants. So that's your big Republican fight. Republican voters plan to support him by a margin of 82-8. All the Republican supposed tough guys who denounced him in the primaries, they've all eaten those words with salt and pepper. The other guy who arguably could claim to be the leader of the Republican Party right now seemed like he was going to dig in and stand against Mr. Trump right at the top levels of the Republican Party hierarchy. His revised position is, and I quote, I'll do whatever. I'll do whatever he wants. And so the big pushback, the great resistance to Donald Trump and the Republican Party appears to be manifest basically as the Bush family not going to Cleveland in July. And I mean, I guess that's still something for any normal major party presidential nominee, but it's really something for a guy who loses to lice, who loses to root canals, who loses to traffic jams, and who, among women, even loses to both cockroaches and hemorrhoids. I have no idea if the Republican Party and its voters have picked a winner here, but the Beltway narrative that they're all torn up about this is really, really, really not borne out by the facts. I mean, like him or loathe him, and most Americans loathe him, Republican voters are very, very clearly with him, unequivocally. He's who they want.